presentation. I am Chris Pappan. I am Kanza Osage, Lakota ancestry, as well as mixed European ancestry. I've lived in Chicago for the past 27 years now with my wonderful wife, Deborah, and our daughter, Jihei, who's about to go off to college. So that's very exciting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of ledger art, just kind of give you guys a brief introduction to that and how my work fits into that tradition and how it also breaks away from that tradition. And then I'm going to talk about some main thematic elements of my work. And so here we go. I'm going to share my screen. That's not one. Sure. Here we go. And okay, so I was supposed to have that up as I was giving my introduction, but anyway, so the history and tradition of ledger art. In the mid-19th century, paper was introduced to the indigenous people of the American plains, mostly through the ledger books of the encroaching Americans. This paper gained prominence as a substrate to visually record the daily life that would soon be transformed beyond comprehension, and to help retain connections to the land and vestiges of our cultures. During that traumatic upheaval, the ledger paper became a way to record the new way of life that Native people were expected to assimilate into. These visual records and memories became known as ledger art. Ledger art also became a Native American art commodity, along with pottery, basketry, and beadwork, and remains so today. The genre gained prominence from the artwork of the political prisoners at Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida. Tourists actually toured the prison and would purchase art from the inmates there. But through serendipity, I have taken on the responsibility of this modern tradition and attempt to not only just maintain the tradition, but to expand the boundaries of what a tradition is supposed to be, to expand the ideas expressed within this tradition, and expand the viewer's definition of who we were and who we are as Native people of this land. Of course, this art form was not created in a vacuum, but is a continuation of the narrative art forms, which then informed works of early 20th century Native artists up to today. I will show you guys a little bit of work from a Kiowa artist whose name is Hagone, or also known as Silverhorn. I think his work is very transcendent. He is known for his confident lines and distinct narratives. What I find most compelling in his work is the tenacity in exploring different avenues of expression. While he includes some more familiar ledger art thematic elements, such as battles between US soldiers and other Native nations, or hunting scenes or scenes of daily life, he was bold enough to start exploring spiritual concepts from his experiences in the Native American church, such as the piece on the lower left. It depicts what a member of the church would wear during ceremonies. And the little creature that's in front of him is a vision that he had during one of those ceremonies. He was also confident enough in his work to illustrate the Kiowa creation story, two of the images which go across the top there. And these pieces are in the Field Museum collection, and I was able to research them. And when you flip through them, it acts like a flip book telling this Kiowa creation story, which is not really seen or talked about in ledger art history. But his prolific body of work also shows that he was constantly refining his work with likely influence from E.A. Burbank, who came from Chicago to meet with Silverhorn and to collect his work. But E.A. Burbank also painted this center portrait of Silverhorn. But then Silverhorn also did several self-portraits, one of which is in the lower right-hand corner. This is called the Thewakandan Bible. And this to me is the epitome of art as resistance. The power of this work transcends time and space, which to me has more spiritual impact than the teachings of what the book originally intended. Because of these acts of resistance, we are able to honor those artists who speak to us across temporal dimensions, and we can continue resisting those that seek to compartmentalize our culture and traditions. Indeed, this work is a testament to the power of art, to the influence of our traditional forebears, and the troubled history of contempt and disregard by scientists and experts of our humanity. I should say too that this work is in a collection in a museum in Munich, I believe. So it's in Germany, and the details of its acquisition into that collection are very dubious. But I was asked to write about it, and what I just read to you was what I wrote about it for an anthropological journal in Germany. Those Germans, boy, they love us natives, don't they? So one theme in my work is the idea of multiplicity. And also I'd like to try to utilize similar materials that would have been used in the genesis of ledger art, such as, colored pencils and ink, graphite, regular pencils. And try to also incorporate these visual elements into my own work, but then basing my work on historical photographs as well. So the idea, is this slide 6 or 7? So the idea of multiple images also led me to the idea of the multiplicity within ourselves. That is the complexity that makes us human. And with these types of images, I'm alluding to different concepts simultaneously. The idea that myself and many others are made up of more than just one heritage or of a mixed race background. Another concept is the Eastern or Asian philosophical idea of looking inward to oneself to find truth, peace, and compassion. Also, by focusing on the area where the two faces intersect, a new meaning is created. A viewer will oftentimes bring a new awareness to the work that may not have been originally intended. Another theme I like to showcase in my work is distortions. And on the top are a couple of historical examples of distorted figures, although the intent is not to portray humans in a realistic way, but more of a gestural way to show action. So, the piece on the left is of a dancer, so, they're showing the motion of the dance. And the piece on the right being a courting scene where, you really get this feeling of a big bear hug being wrapped in a blanket, that sort of thing. But the distortion of my work is more deliberately referencing the distorted idea of who we are, or who we are supposed to be as Native people, and that idea that has been maintained throughout the centuries. But it's also indicative of how Native people are just as guilty of perpetuating that distorted ideal as well. With the recent events the past week, I was kind of grappling with whether or not I should, one, even do this presentation, and then two, show these works. But, I thought, our voice is important and needs to be heard. And the fact that these works have been done, in previous years, shows that I'm not inciting violence to anyone, but the idea of, just kind of getting rid of old ideas and bringing about new ideas. And I think that's kind of where we are today, with the Black Lives Movement happening, and, getting over that initial outrage, but now really focusing on bringing masses of people together and bringing ideas of change to the forefront. And so that's what these pieces are really about. Taking that idea of a low standard that we've been forced to accept for ourselves, and to burn that idea and say, we don't have to accept these low standards anymore. We can accept better for ourselves, and we should demand better for ourselves. And not just for ourselves, but for our communities and for our children as well. And also in terms of ledger art, I think the fire is a good simile, or it kind of parallels the life of the substrate itself, and how it endures, it survives. And actually, I have paper that survived the Great Chicago Fire, so that's interesting as well. And one major thing that I'm working on now, especially at the Hyde Park Art Center, is the expansion of the scale of my work. When this paper was introduced to folks back in the mid 1800s and onto today, artists tend to limit themselves to one side of the page, just working within that one little boundary, which is fine. And artists can choose to do whatever they want. But I really like this historical example in the middle, and how you can see the artist has chosen to use both sides of the page to create a larger narrative. And so what I've done is kind of taken that idea and just expanded on it, and really started tiling these pages together and creating larger canvases for myself. So the portraits you see in the corners there are almost like life-size drawings of folks. But then scale can also equate to distortion. And so with this series, the focus is drawn in very close to the face. And it's erasing any hints of a particular culture. And the viewer is forced to see only the humanity of the people. And as those hints of culture are erased, there are hints that are given around them, such as the maps that equate the connection to the land, or the geometric patterns that you'd see in like more traditional artwork, as well as the substrate also alluding to the tradition of ledger art. So then these pieces ask the viewer, both native and non-native, to discern what defines Native America. I had the good fortune of being able to create an installation work at a small gallery in Indiana a couple of years ago. And this was an idea that had kind of been brewing for a while, after, thinking of the idea of scale, and, how much further can I go with it? This is kind of the result of that idea. And the intent of it is to immerse the viewer into my work and offer a hint of Southern Plains Native American ideologies. By expanding the scale of the graphic motifs that appear in my drawings, the participant is then compelled to study the ledger pages, which act as a sort of timeline. The history inscribed on the ledger pages is mundane and arbitrary, but through them, I'm asking the viewer to ponder how valuable is this information in today's world? What do we consider valuable and why? Does a perceived value arise merely from their age, the information contained on the pages, or some other ambiguous set of parameters that we ascribe to these methods and ephemera? Although a certain value could be found in the admiration of the tenacity of such a fragile substrate. The large shapes of color are an antithesis to the tedium within the pages while working in harmony with them. These shapes represent the river of life, which is the yellow triangles, the moon, which is the circle, and the red cross is a star. Those are all universal truths which we can all relate. Also had another opportunity to expand my canvas to Billboard. These are electronic billboards throughout the Chicago highway system. And this was done in conjunction with Art Expo last year. And so there were 10 other artists, I believe, who had pieces. So it was really fun to drive around Chicago and to, try to catch my work up on a billboard without crashing into anybody else. But luckily in Chicago, the traffic is pretty slow. So there were times you could just sit in traffic and see my art. But the idea of this piece was to bring attention to Indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes. And so the images of Potawatomi girl and just kind of incorporating some of my motifs into it as well. The title of it is Ghosts of Route 66, and also alluding to the fact that Route 66 starts or ends in Chicago as well. The Mother Road. The power of art has manifested itself to me in different ways. It's taken me to places that I never thought I would go. It's brought wonderful people into my life. And this experience at the Field Museum has really helped me realize the transformative power of art and that my work could work in that capacity as well. I never really thought about it that way, but with this installation, I was able to witness that power. But conversely, with this installation, I'd also witnessed the power of the centuries of racism, miseducation, and genocide that have been wrought upon our people. So on the good side of this art installation at the Field Museum, it was great to showcase my work. It was great that the Field Museum was willing to take a chance on my work and to literally build up walls in front of these old display cases to, display my work. But on the flip side, the museum has an extremely long history of misrepresenting us and misinforming generations of people about our histories and our culture and who we are. So what I find really interesting with my work at the Field Museum was that kids really small children to teenagers, young adults were very engaged with what was happening with this installation, this intervention, and were very in tune with it. Or if they weren't, they were asking the adults they were with, wow, what is this? What's going on? So one case, though, it was a really busy day at the museum's field trip day there or something, and there's this group kind of walking past us. I was with somebody and I was showing them around the exhibit, and we're actually standing in this very spot, and there was this little girl who was with an adult, and they were like walking past us really quick, and the adult turned around to the little girl and yelled at her, "I told you all these people in these cases are dead," and then grabbed her hand and walked off. And it was just like, I was a deer in the headlights, punched in the gut, kind of like, what the hell? So all I could do was just like, "Hey, lady, I'm standing right here. I am of these people. These are my people. What are you talking about?" But it was really noisy, and they rushed off, and it was like a kind of a rude awakening, I guess. Because I had just gotten so much positive feedback about the exhibit that I hadn't really heard anything negative. Not that that was negative about my work, but it was just, just that reaction of somebody to say, they're all dead, even though there's physical evidence of living people right in front of them. Was just, it made me think about why somebody would say that to a kid. And first of all, it was the easy answer for this adult to say to this kid who had obviously a lot of questions about why this artwork is here and what does it mean. So, that was the easy answer for the adult to, not have to deal with any major issues and, to get on with their tour of the museum, which they still had a lot to see or whatever. So, not to make any excuses for them, but it was just, I was trying to justify it in my head afterwards, like, why would somebody say that? And then it just, it really brought home that history that the museum had of misinforming people about, our history. So, and then it also really made me watch other people go through this exhibit more closely. And I noticed that people would kind of try to avoid my work and go to where my work wasn't, so they could like identify with something familiar to them, like with like a basket or a bow and arrow or something. But the cool thing about this video that I'll show you in a minute, um, it the music for it just it spread throughout the entire hall. So as people were trying to ignore our contemporary selves, they were reminded of it through the soundtrack of the video. And I wanted to share these works with you really quickly. They were completed at my time at the Hyde Park Art Center, which will pick back up again, hopefully very soon. But the series is titled "Of White Bread and Miracles," and they serve as a response to the Boy Scout tradition of misappropriating sacred Native American practices. I just got an alert that my internet is unstable, so if I'm breaking up, I apologize. But in this case, the practices that were being appropriated by the Boy Scouts were for a hobby. So the figures come from a manual titled "Here is Your New Hobby: Indian Dancing and Costumes." And this book is an example of cognitive dissonance, as it erases any vestiges of contemporary Native people and homogenizes all Native American cultures, while making casual remarks such as, get a local Indian to teach you singing and dancing if you can. So basically, the Boy Scouts was trying to teach youth how to dance through these awkward and static black and white photographs of a young man and woman in a gymnasium. So it was just, it was really maddening to me to see this book. But I wanted to show people that, this is how we've been treated over the years. But by appropriating these figures from the book and recontextualizing them, I'm introducing the power of dance for our people. That dance is not merely a hobby, it's a sacred form of prayer and sacrifice that has deep and varying roots and meaning for Native people everywhere. These works also deal with the idea of innocence lost and institutionalized racism. To interject the static poses that are meant to teach movement with elements of spirituality, authenticity, and contemporary aspects, I am reclaiming that which has been erased or stolen. I have to go to the video link for this. Hopefully we did a test run of it and hopefully it's not too jerky for you, but this is the video installation that was at the Field Museum. And when you hear the soundtrack, oh, it's not gonna load for me now. But this is the soundtrack that was playing throughout the hall that I was speaking of earlier that reminded those deniers of our contemporary existence. So kind of like the basic idea of this was to attempt to bring the idea of ledger art and my interpretation of ledger art into a video format. So it begins with one of the first motion pictures ever created, and that was with Thomas Edison's kinetoscope. The dancers who were from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, they were Strong Talker, Pine, Last Horse, Parts His Hair, and Haircoat. The still images you see are of contemporary Native people expressing our diversity. And that great soundtrack was created by Santiago X, utilizing his original music with samples of a powwow announcer and a singer from a wax cylinder recording. So again, hopefully this works well for you. Sorry about that. So that's all I have. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll open it up to questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Chris, for presenting your work and talking more about the historical elements of it. I did have a question that I posed in the chat earlier when we were looking at the images of fire, and I was curious about what the significance of the RV or camper was in the images, the items that were being burned, and what that was supposed to represent or speak further on.
Yeah, so the trailers to me represent poverty. But they're on the other side, on the other side of that coin, they also represent privilege as well. So, for the privilege, they're able to hop in their camper, their RV, or trailer, go wherever the wind will take them. Conversely, Native people live in dilapidated trailers that you see in all the poverty porn. And, it's just that, that awful irony of, being trapped in a place in something that's supposed to be mobile. So, and it's just that, just that crazy idea that, that low standard that we've been given that we need to get rid of.
Thank you so much for sharing further. Very insightful.
Yeah, sorry, I just opened the chat, so I didn't.
No worries at all. And if anyone else has questions, feel free to ask. We also would love to share the video that Chris shared so people can view it on their own or share with others as well.
Yes, I will post that in the chat now.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Chris. It's Mariela. I am curious about what it was like to work with the Field Museum in a project like this. I don't know if this is something that they've done before, this kind of collaboration. So that's one question. And thinking about how your work is confronting so much of the work that they've been doing for so long. I'm curious about how conversations went, how much of the work that you're doing that was challenging their narratives, right? How that was received, and yeah, something
Yeah,
along.
so when I was brought on to do that exhibition, they had actually done a couple other exhibits before with contemporary Native artists. The curator, Alika Wally, she wanted to start to facilitate a change within the narrative of that hall, with that exhibit hall. And she thought, a good way to do that quickly and easily would be to bring in contemporary artists to view the collection, be inspired by the collection, and create works based on those interactions. So I want to say there were two other artists before me. But what made mine different was that the artists before were kind of confined to this little gallery space. But what happened with my show is that another artist was brought in by one of the trustees, and basically, put the money forward for her exhibition as well to kind of coincide same time as mine. So, and she works in, I guess you could say, miniatures, kind of. She creates these amazing doll figures that are extremely detailed. So her work is very small scale. So we decided that her work could fit a lot better in that smaller gallery space. And then I was just kind of given at the beginning, like free reign to kind of think of an installation and intervention in that entire hall. So so that's what was unique about my experience there. And as far as working with them, I was in my case, I was really surprised um, how willing they were to listen to me and to let my voice be put at the forefront. Um, any of the didactic labels were all in my voice, all based on interviews I had with the development folks there. So, so everything, any description of the work, it was all from me. So that was extremely important. And any comments I had made about works from the collection were also included, any of the historical works. So so that was really great to see. But again, it was just kind of weird because it didn't fill the entire hall. It was just kind of like half and half, or just kind of like stuck in there. And so, I think looking back on it, I think it would have been better if it were the entire hall, because again, like I said, people were kind of meandering around, trying to avoid my work to relate to something more more recognizable for them. Something that fit more with what they were taught about who we are as people. But that's not to say that because the museum has done this intervention now, that they're off the hook for anything. There's still a lot of work to be done. A lot of work is being done at this museum. They've completely deinstalled all of the historic exhibit now. My wife has been hired on there as a community engagement person, a position which they've never had before. They now have a Native American advisory board just temporary. They should have a permanent Native American advisory board, but this advisory board is helping to reshape the new exhibit that will go into that hall. So on the surface, you know, there's work being done and there's change being made, but there's still a lot of change that needs to be made within the institution. That a lot of detail that I won't go into here, but Andrea knows all about it. Did that answer your question, Marietta?
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so it takes me a while to figure out how to speak. But yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Andrea, your question about the decals that were put on the display cases, that was just kind of basically it was, first of all, a way to include more of my artwork in the exhibit without, having to build walls in front of the cases. But the decals were printed on a material that the museum uses for labeling other exhibits. It didn't harm the glass or anything. It's water-based. Extremely expensive, apparently, but but it was really effective in that it created this temporary barrier almost. And like I said, that people had to look around my work, and it was literally, in their line of sight that they had to look around this contemporary work to see something that was probably false or mislabeled behind it. And I think for those people that are less informed about Native history and who we are, I think that was very disconcerting to them. So, but it kind of shook them up without literally hitting them over the head. It was a very subtle way of intervening in that space to try to change people's perspectives. And then also, those specific pieces were chosen for those specific cases because for aesthetic qualities. So the one case that had the "Thank You Grandmother" print, the color tone of the paper matched the background of that exhibit case. So the effect I was trying to go for was to have kind of almost like a floating effect of my work kind of in front of the case. And then also the opacity of the print could be adjusted as well. So you could kind of see what was coming through the case behind as well. And then it was really cool too, because then it created all these dimensions of history, all these layers of history. And then the cases almost became like a historical substrate of, like the ledger paper, placing my work, my ideas, my contemporary ideas of who we are directly on this old, outdated thing. Thank you for that.
I have a question. The nature of your intervention at the field, as you've described, is so specific to that space. It's quite an intimate space. It's such a specific context. It's part of this larger museum, and it's very, interior. I wanted to ask you about the nature of the public sphere, public space, and how you're thinking about it now. Related to how you may have used it in the past, but especially at this moment, the public space has been, kind of so guarded, and I think there's so much ambivalence at this current moment about how to take care of the public space, how people can use it, and then especially right now in this week, about how it has been used and how people have really found so much possibility in it. So I just wanted to ask you about what are your thoughts now about the possibilities of anything, interventions in public, or how you might envision using it or thinking about it going forward.
There's a piece that I did that I didn't include in this presentation, unfortunately. It was actually a public art piece that was for this, I don't know how to describe them. They're a collective group of different organizations of different cities that transform public space into park space. So in Chicago, it's the 606. In New York City, it's the High Line. Toronto, the Bentway. So they kind of got together and did this art project. And this was around the time that the earlier when the Confederate monuments were being torn down by folks. And my contribution to this art project was, to be more specific for Chicago, to be a land acknowledgement, basically to make people aware of the indigenous presence of people in the past and the present. And so after that, I thought, this could be a really good way to, this could happen in any city, anywhere in the United States. To take this idea of, the indigenous people of that area and make people aware of that, of who the indigenous people were and still are of that area. So I think now in this specific moment, with the amplification of Black voices, they are including Native presence in their spaces. Like almost anytime I hear somebody talking about, the history of racism, it goes right back to the beginning and the subjugation of Native American people. So I think that, it's the time is perfect for Native folks to be out there, and they are. The AIM folks in Minnesota are, really working hard to protect the Native community there and making their voices heard. But yeah, I think, it's a great time for people to listen now and to hear our story. And I think in terms of artwork, public artwork, the door is wide open. There's so many things that can be done. And with public artwork, in terms of Native American artists doing public work, there's always Native artists in those spaces that can be doing that work. You don't have to bring in, that is to say, not any Indian will do for a project. You can get, people should be able to find Native artists within whatever space they're in to have their voice heard through artwork or poetry or song or, through any form of art.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Do we have any other further questions for Chris today?
Not a question. Just wanted to say thank you, Chris. Good job.
Thanks, Mom.
So sweet.
All right, well, yeah, I hope to see everyone at the Hyde Park Art Center soon.
Yes, we definitely miss you around the Hyde Park Art Center, and we hope that we can all come together soon and keep doing the great work that we're doing, and you can continue the great work that you've been doing. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for everything that you've done for me at the Hyde Park Art Center, and I'm just so appreciative that you guys are doing great work, and keep it up.
thank you, you too. Everyone,
Thank
have a
you.
great day. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank
you.